Welcome to Bookish Mind, Season 2. In this final episode, we dive into Chapter 15 of Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, Outwitting the 6 Ghosts of Fear. Hill invites us to confront the hidden fears that shape our lives and limit our success, and reminds us that the true battlefield of wealth and achievement lies within our own minds. Okay, let's jump right in. Today, we are undertaking a deep dive into, well, one of the most crucial sections of Napoleon Hill's timeless work, Think and Grow Rich. Specifically, Chapter 15, How to Outwit the 6 Ghosts of Fear.
That's right, a really pivotal chapter.
Absolutely. You've shared these excerpts, and our mission, our deep dive today, is to really unpack Hill's framework. We want to understand not just what these 6 basic fears are, but, where they come from, their symptoms, which can be quite insidious.
Very subtle sometimes, yeah.
And most importantly, his pretty bold claims about how to actually overcome them to achieve what he calls riches.
And it's key to remember his definition of riches there, isn't it? It's not just about money. It's broader spiritual, mental, material success. The whole package.
Exactly. And Hill positions this chapter as, well, essential groundwork. He basically argues that all the powerful ideas in the rest of the book, desire, faith, specialized knowledge, all that stuff, they just won't work effectively if your mind is clogged up or held captive by these internal enemies.
Right. It's like trying to build a house on shaky foundations.
Mm-hmm.
This chapter is about shoring up those foundations first, identifying and clearing out the internal junk, the barriers.
So true mastery, the kind that gets real results, it absolutely starts inside your own head. It's the prerequisite.
Precisely. Mastering your mind first.
And he doesn't waste any time naming the main culprits, does he? He calls out an unholy trio that he says stands right in the way of applying his philosophy.
Yeah, the big 3. Indecision, doubt, and fear.
What's really fascinating, I think, is how he describes their relationship, how they grow. He paints this picture where indecision is like the starting point, the seed.
Just that little hesitation, that initial lack of commitment.
Exactly. And that tiny seed, if you let it sit there, if you don't deal with it, it starts to harden, to solidify.
And that's when it crystallizes into doubt. It takes shape.
And then this is the crucial bit. Indecision and doubt, they don't just stay separate. They mix together, they blend.
And from that blend emerges fear, full-blown fear.
So it's a process then, almost like a slow poison starting small.
Exactly that. And the real danger, the reason it's so hard to deal with sometimes, is that this whole process from that tiny seed of indecision to, debilitating fear, it's often incredibly slow and subtle.
Happening under the radar.
Pretty much. It happens quietly. Maybe you don't even notice it at first, embedding itself deep in your subconscious mind. And because it's operating beneath the surface, it becomes really difficult to consciously pinpoint where it started or just how deep it goes.
Which makes it harder to root out, obviously.
Much harder to locate and eliminate, yeah.
So this chapter, Chapter 15, is basically about dragging that whole subconscious process out into the light, making the invisible enemy visible.
That's the absolute core idea. Hill says it himself. The purpose here is to shine a big spotlight on both the cause and the cure of these basic fears. And he's emphatic about it. He insists you must master these fears. You have to actively outwit them before you can really use the rest of his philosophy effectively to build riches.
And he encourages you, the listener, to do some pretty deep self-analysis right here, doesn't he? To look at yourself as we talk through these fears.
Yes, absolutely. Examine yourself, see which ones might be, holding you back personally.
All right, let's name these inner demons then. Hill identifies 6 basic fears. He says they're pretty much universal. Everyone has them to some degree.
And he lists them generally in order of how common they seem to be, or maybe their impact.
Right. So number 1, the fear of poverty, then the fear of criticism, the fear of ill health, the fear of loss of love of someone, the fear of old age, and finally, the fear of death.
And he makes a really strong claim here. He basically asserts that any other fear you might have, fear of spiders, fear of flying, fear of public speaking, whatever, it's just a minor variation.
Yeah, it's just an offshoot.
Yeah, an offshoot that could be grouped under one of these 6 main headings. These are the foundational fears. Everything else springs from them.
It's interesting, too, how he notes their prevalence can kind of shift, cyclically, amplified by what's happening in society.
Oh, definitely. Like during the Great Depression, the fear of poverty was just overwhelming for so many.
Makes sense. And in wartime, fear of death, after a pandemic, fear of ill health. It shows how outside events can really poke at these deep-seated anxieties.
But here's where Hill drops what might be the most, empowering idea in the whole chapter.
Yeah.
His core assertion. Fears are nothing more than states of mind.
Just states of mind.
That's it. And because they live in the mind, they are, by their very nature, subject to our control. We can direct them.
He uses that example of physicians, right?
Yes, a compelling one. He points out that doctors are way less likely to catch contagious diseases than the average person, even though they're constantly exposed.
And he doesn't think it's just physical resistance.
Not primarily. He argues it's because they've trained themselves not to fear the disease. Their immunity, he suggests, is rooted largely, maybe even entirely, in that absolute lack of fear.
Wow, that really flips the script. Suggests our mental state is like a shield, not just for thoughts, but maybe even physically.
And he pushes it further, connecting mind and reality deeply. He says man never creates anything tangible without first thinking it, right? A thought impulse comes first.
Okay, that makes sense.
But here's the key point he hammers home. Man's thought impulses immediately begin to translate themselves into their physical equivalent. Immediately.
Whether you chose the thought or not.
Exactly. Voluntarily or involuntarily. Thoughts you picked up from others, stray ideas floating around, they can shape your destiny, your finances, your career, your relationships, just as powerfully as the thoughts you deliberately create yourself.
So it's not just our own internal demons we're wrestling with, but we can actually absorb the negativity and fear from the world around us.
Precisely. And according to Hill, this is the fundamental reason why some people seem perpetually lucky, things just go their way, while others, maybe just as smart or talented, seem stuck under a dark cloud.
It comes down to controlling your own mind.
It all boils down to that one singular absolute power every single human has.
Yeah.
The power to control your own mind. You can choose, he says, to leave your mind open like a field, letting any old tramp thought impulse wander in. Or you can actively shut the gates and allow entry only to the thoughts you have deliberately chosen. Nature, Hill insists, gave us absolute control over just one thing: thought. Mastering that control is the key to mastering fear, and ultimately, mastering your destiny.
If we accept Hill's premise, and he seems pretty convinced that all thought impulses tend to manifest physically,
Which he states is beyond doubt, yeah.
then the implications are stark. Thoughts rooted in fear and poverty just cannot, by natural law, produce courage and wealth.
Impossible.
Yeah.
He points to the Great Depression as a massive real-world example. After the 1929 crash, people collectively started thinking poverty, focusing on it, fearing it, expecting it.
And that mass thought created the reality.
He argues it slowly but surely materialized into the physical reality of economic depression. It had to happen, in his view, because it followed this fundamental law of thought translation.
Okay, let's dive into that first fear then. The one Hill puts right at the top, calls the most destructive, the hardest to master, the fear of poverty.
Yeah, and he's very direct about it. No compromise possible between poverty and riches. They're polar opposites going in different directions.
So if you truly want riches in that broad sense Hill uses, you have to just refuse point blank to accept any circumstance that leads towards poverty. Take a stand.
Absolutely. Draw a line in the sand.
And this circles right back to the start of the book, doesn't it? To desire.
It absolutely does. That initial spark, the starting point for everything, is a burning desire. Chapter 1 showed how to cultivate that. Now, Chapter 15 gives the instructions for, preparing the soil, clearing the weeds, the fears, so the desire can actually grow.
It's the mental prep work needed to make desire stick.
Exactly. Mental conditioning.
Hill really puts the onus on the listener here, though. He basically issues this challenge to do a serious self-inventory after reading this chapter.
Yeah, he says, pretty bluntly, if you read this and you're still willing to accept poverty, well, you'll probably get it, because your state of mind determines it.
But if you're willing to demand riches and you have to define what that means for you, the form, the quantity, then the book gives you the roadmap.
But the crucial part is the demand itself, which he says requires only one thing: a state of mind.
And that state of mind, as we just covered, is the only thing you have absolute control over. You can't buy courage, you have to create it internally.
Right. And Hill just hammers home how crippling this fear of poverty is. It's only a state of mind, he keeps saying. But look at the depression. That one state of mind was enough to completely destroy people's chances, no matter how capable they were.
He lists the effects, and it's brutal. It paralyzes reason, destroys imagination, kills self-reliance, drains enthusiasm, stifles initiative,
Breeds uncertainty, fuels procrastination, makes self-control impossible.
wipes out charm, distorts thinking, wrecks concentration, beats persistence, turns willpower to nothing.
Crushes ambition, clouds memory. It basically just invites failure in every possible way.
And emotionally too, right? Kills love, destroys finer feelings, discourages friendship, invites disaster, leads to sleeplessness, misery, unhappiness.
All this, he points out, while we live in a world that's potentially overflowing with abundance, the only thing standing between us and what we want is often just a lack of definite purpose, driven by a mind free from this fear.
Hill's idea about the origin is interesting, provocative. He speculates it came from an inherited tendency for humans to prey on each other economically.
Yeah, contrasting it with animals preying physically. Man with his supposedly higher intellect gets more satisfaction, he suggests, from consuming others financially. He calls humanity avaricious, needing laws just to stop us from robbing each other blind.
He observes his own time as being particularly money-mad. Wealth equals respect, no matter how you got it. Poverty equals suffering and humility.
He even throws in that sharp line about some men just not being trustworthy with money, period.
And connects it to marriage motives, busy divorce courts, suggesting the hunger for wealth is so intense people will get it legally if they can, but
Yeah.
maybe other ways if needed.
Yeah, it's a pretty cynical take on human nature in that context.
And this is where he strongly encourages that self-analysis again. He urges you, the listener, to pause right here and do this tough self-check.
If you want more than just mediocrity, it's critical. You have to look at yourself honestly. Be the judge, the jury, the prosecutor, the defense, all of it.
Face the facts, no matter how uncomfortable. Demand direct answers. And if you can't be impartial,
Ask someone who knows you well, someone you trust to be honest, to help you see yourself clearly. The goal is truth, even if it stings a bit.
because most people, he notes, would deny being controlled by fear if you ask them directly. But they're still subtly handicapped by these deep fears they don't even recognize.
It takes courage to dig them up. Real, unflinching analysis.
Okay, so let's talk symptoms. The signs that this fear of poverty might actually be running the show in your life. He'll list several.
First up is indifference. Just a general lack of ambition, a kind of quiet acceptance of poverty, taking whatever life gives without really fighting for more.
Shows up as laziness, maybe. Lack of initiative, imagination, enthusiasm, self-control.
Exactly. Then there's indecision, the habit of letting others think for now, always staying on the fence, never committing.
Doubt comes next. Often disguised, right? Masked by excuses, alibis to explain away failure or lack of progress.
Or it comes out as envy of successful people, or criticizing them.
Worry, that's a big one. How does that show up?
Finding fault with others, spending more than you earn, neglecting your appearance. Maybe a frown becomes permanent.
Intemperance, too. Using alcohol or drugs. General nervousness, lack of poise, self-consciousness, lack of self-reliance.
All listed under worry. Then, overcaution. This is always looking at the negative side, talking about potential failure instead of focusing on success.
Knowing all the ways things can go wrong, but never planning how to avoid them.
Precisely. Always waiting for the right time, which never comes. Remembering every failure, forgetting every win. Seeing only the hole in the donut.
Pessimism that can even make you sick, he suggests. Indigestion, bad attitude.
Yeah. And finally, procrastination. Putting things off, especially things you know you should have done ages ago.
Spending more time making excuses than actually doing the work.
That's the one. It's tied closely to overcaution, doubt, worry. Avoiding responsibility, compromising with problems instead of tackling them, bargaining for pennies instead of demanding riches.
And this procrastination often comes from expecting poverty, doesn't it, rather than demanding wealth?
Yes, and it's often reinforced by hanging out with other people who've also accepted poverty, instead of seeking out those who are demanding and getting more.
To really hit home just how soul-crushing poverty and its fear can be, Hill includes that really powerful passage from Westbrook Pegler.
Oh yeah, that's a stark piece. Pegler talks about how money, just simple clamshells or metal discs or scraps of paper, is absolutely vital for a man's spirit, his self-respect.
When a man's broke, something fundamental changes. Shows in his posture, his eyes.
Exactly. An undeniable feeling of inferiority, even if he knows he's capable. Pegler captures that feeling of living on borrowed money, how it lacks the spirit of earned money.
And he distinguishes this from, like, habitual bums, focusing on normally ambitious people who've just hit hard times.
Right. Then he makes that striking, maybe controversial point about women suffering differently, perhaps more invisibly, concealing their despair more.
Pegler paints this vivid picture. Aimless wandering, staring into shop windows, feeling inferior, trying to keep warm in public places. Even if well-dressed, the posture gives it away.
That deep envy for people who are busy, employed, who have their independence and self-respect. Their manhood, as he puts it.
And the core line that just punches you. It is just money which makes this difference in him. With a little money, he would be himself again.
It shows how deeply financial hardship and the fear that comes with it can just erode your sense of self, your dignity.
Pegler also touches on the exploitative job market back then, right? Pitiful wages, intrusive questions, like asking religion for an 11-cent an hour clerk job.
Yeah, he calls it brutal effrontery. Shows the vulnerability of people trapped by poverty and fear.
That excerpt really drives home that overcoming this fear isn't just about getting rich, it's about reclaiming who you are, your agency, your self-respect.
Absolutely fundamental.
So that's the devastating fear of poverty, its origins, symptoms. Let's move to the second major one Hill identifies, the fear of criticism.
Another big one. He says it's nearly as universal as the fear of poverty and just as fatal to achievement.
Why? What does it primarily damage?
Initiative and imagination, the very things you need to create, to innovate, to overcome obstacles.
He speculates a bit on where it comes from. Politics, fashion.
Yeah, but he leans towards this idea of an inherited tendency. We justify taking from others by criticizing their character, like thieves bad-mouthing their victims or politicians smearing opponents.
Make yourself feel better by putting others down.
Basically. And this fear shows up everywhere, even in small, seemingly silly ways. Hill uses that example of boldness, men wearing tight hats out of conformity, fearing criticism if they don't.
While women's hats were more decorative, looser, correlating with less baldness, a bit dated maybe, but illustrates the point about conformity driven by fear.
Exactly. And fashion more broadly. Manufacturers capitalize on this fear, constantly changing styles in clothes, cars. You feel you have to buy the latest thing, even if your old one's fine, just to avoid judgment.
But it goes deeper than just clothes and cars, right?
Oh, much deeper. He talks about people being afraid to express non-traditional religious beliefs, even in enlightened times. Why? Because of the historical memory of being punished, even killed, for dissent. That fear lingers.
So the damage this fear does, robs initiative, destroys imagination, limits individuality, undermines self-reliance, a similar pattern of destruction.
Very similar. And he really emphasizes the damage criticism does to children. Parents constantly criticizing can build deep inferiority complexes, doing irreparable harm.
He shares that sad story about his childhood friend.
Yeah, whose mother always criticized and predicted he'd end up in reform school. And tragically, he did. Just shows the power of those negative inputs, especially early on.
It really makes you think about the impact of our words.
Definitely. Hill contrasts destructive criticism with constructive suggestion. Good employers, good parents, they build people up, they don't tear them down. Criticism breeds fear or resentment, he says, never love or affection.
So how does this fear of criticism manifest? What are the symptoms to look out for?
Okay, first, self-consciousness, nervousness, timidity, especially when talking or meeting people, awkward movements, shifting eyes.
Lack of poise, trouble controlling your voice, nervous around others, bad posture, even poor memory.
Yes. Then, personality issues, lacking firmness, maybe lacking charm, can't express opinions clearly, avoids tough issues, agrees with everyone without thinking.
An inferiority complex, that sounds major. How does that show up?
It can be paradoxical. Sometimes it's needing to constantly approve of yourself out loud, to cover up how you really feel, using big words to impress, imitating others.
Or even boasting about things you haven't done, which might look like confidence, but isn't.
Exactly. It can be mistaken for superiority. Then there's extravagant spending beyond your means, trying to keep up with the Joneses, all driven by fear of being seen as less successful.
Lack of initiative, too. Failing to grab opportunities, scared to voice opinions or ideas, being evasive, hesitant, maybe even deceitful to avoid criticism.
All signs. And finally, lack of ambition. Mental and physical laziness, not asserting yourself, slow decisions, easily influenced, criticizing behind backs but flattering to faces, giving up easily, quitting under pressure, being suspicious, lacking tact, unwilling to accept blame for mistakes.
Wow. It's striking how deeply this worry about what others think can mess with our actions, stifle who we really are.
It's incredibly pervasive, a powerful force.
Okay, so from worrying about others' opinions to worrying about our own bodies, let's explore the third fear, the fear of ill health.
Hill traces this one back to physical and social heredity, but also our association with the scary, unknown parts of illness and death. Those terrible worlds we hear about but don't really understand.
And he blames unethical sellers of health, too, people profiting from fear.
Yeah, those who push unnecessary cures or just generally play on people's anxieties about wellness. He says they help keep the fear alive.
What are the main reasons he gives for this fear?
Two main things. First, the frightening mental images of what could happen if sickness leads to death. Second, the very real economic cost that illness can bring. Lost income, medical bills.
And this is where the mind's power comes in again, strongly. He mentions that doctors estimate 75% of patients suffering from hypochondria, imaginary illness.
Right. And he stresses again that the fear of getting sick, even with no actual cause, can produce the physical symptoms of the illness you're afraid of.
So just being scared of the flu could make you feel flu-like symptoms.
According to Hill, absolutely. It links back to that physician immunity idea. A big part of it is their trained lack of fear. The mind is powerful, builder or destroyer.
He mentions how this fear was exploited by patent medicine companies.
Hugely. Fortunes were built preying on this weakness. He references a Collier's Weekly campaign that exposed some of the worst offenders back in the day.
And that story about the New York City mayor during the WWI flu epidemic?
Yeah, a great example. The mayor asked newspapers to stop the scare headlines, recognizing the psychological damage fear was doing. They agreed, and the epidemic actually subsided significantly within a month. Shows the power of suggestion, mass psychology.
Hill even did his own little experiment, didn't he? Making someone feel sick just by suggesting it repeatedly?
He did. Got 3 friends to tell someone they looked terribly ill. First time, dismissed. Second, admitted feeling unwell. Third, genuinely felt ill. A bit cruel, maybe, but makes the point about suggestion.
He even compares it to hexing, or placing a spell.
Yeah, seeing it as another form of negative thought impulse directed at someone with destructive potential.
So, disease can start with negative thoughts from others or from yourself.
That's his strong assertion. He quotes that wise guy who, when asked how he felt, wanted to deck the questioner, knowing the negative potential of just focusing on health.
He also connects emotional disappointment business or love to getting sick.
Definitely. He tells that dramatic story of the young man hospitalized by heartbreak. Specialist brings in a charming nurse, instructs her to make love to him.
And he gets better, even though the remedy was a hoax.
Yep, discharged in 3 weeks, cured of the original problem. They even got married. A wild story, but it illustrates how a massive shift in mental and emotional state can impact physical health.
So changing your climate for health often means changing your mental attitude.
That's the core idea. He noted doctors were swamped during the Depression, linking it to the widespread negative thinking causing ill health.
Okay, let's get into the specific symptoms of the fear of ill health.
First is autosuggestion, but used negatively. Actively looking for symptoms, expecting them, almost enjoying imaginary illness, talking about it constantly.
Trying health fads, talking operations, experimenting with diets without guidance.
All part of it. Then hypochondria, closely related, constantly talking about or focusing on disease, expecting it until you have a nervous breakdown. Hill says no medicine cures this. It's negative thought needing positive replacement.
And this imaginary illness can do real damage, cause nerves.
As much damage as the feared disease itself, he claims. Avoiding exercise is another symptom. Fear of strain or just focusing on being frail leads to inactivity, weight gain, further decline.
Susceptibility. The fear itself breaks down resistance.
Yes. Fear weakens the body's defenses, making it more likely you'll catch whatever you're afraid of or exposed to.
And it links to fear of poverty, worrying about medical bills, saving for burial.
Often intertwined, yeah, especially for hypochondriacs. Then there's self-coddling, seeking sympathy by faking or exaggerating illness, often an excuse for laziness or lack of ambition.
Intemperance, using booze or drugs for pain instead of fixing the cause.
Listed as a symptom. And finally, the habit of constantly reading about diseases, worrying about them, reading those patent medicine ads that fuel the fear.
It's clear Hill sees this fear as having real physical impact, deeply tied to our thoughts and what we let in.
Absolutely. A mind-body connection he takes very seriously.
Okay, from worrying about ourselves to worrying about our relationships. The fourth fear. The fear of loss of love of someone.
Hill links this one back to man's polygamous habit, tracing it from ancient times, taking mates by force to modern times.
Where the methods are different: persuasion, gifts, bait, as he calls it.
Right. Pretty close. Cars. But he argues the underlying habits and anxieties are basically the same.
He calls this the most painful of the 6 fears, capable of causing serious mental and physical harm, even insanity.
He does, and he observes that women, perhaps historically conditioned, tend to be more susceptible. Learning men can be polygamous, not always trustworthy with rivals. This fear breeds jealousy, he says.
And other forms of intense fixation, sometimes violent.
Yeah, what he calls dementia precox, suspicion towards loved ones without any real basis.
What are the specific symptoms listed for this fear?
Jealousy is number one. Suspicion without evidence. Accusing infidelity groundlessly. General mistrust of everyone. Inability to have faith.
Fault finding is another, constantly criticizing loved ones, friends, often over nothing.
Yes, and gambling cheating. Taking big risks with money. Trying to buy love or keep it with lavish gifts, believing it can be bought. Spending beyond means. Getting into debt for appearances.
Other symptoms: insomnia, nervousness, lack of persistence, lack of self-control, bad temper.
All listed under this fear. It seems rooted in deep emotional insecurity, leading to destructive patterns.
It really hits that core human need for connection, and when that feels shaky, the fear can be intense.
Very intense, very damaging.
Okay, moving from fears about current losses to fears about future decline. The fifth fear, the fear of old age.
Hill says this grows mainly from two sources. First, the big one, fear of poverty in old age, the dread of the poorhouse.
And second,
What he calls false and cruel teachings from the past, like fire and brimstone doctrines used to control people through fear of the afterlife, which somehow gets tangled up with aging.
it connects to other fears too, right? Ill health being more likely, even fear of losing attractiveness.
Yes, those contribute. But he stresses that the fear of poverty in old age is the primary driver for most people. Losing financial independence is a huge anxiety.
And also losing freedom and independence generally, physical and economic.
That's another contributing factor he mentions.
What are the telltale symptoms of this fear of old age?
A key one is starting to slow down and develop an inferiority complex around age 40, which he calls the age of mental maturity. People falsely believe they're slipping.
But Hill disagrees strongly. He thinks 40-60 are the most useful years.
Absolutely. Mentally, spiritually. So people are basically psyching themselves into decline based on a number, missing their peak potential.
Another symptom, speaking apologetically about being old at 40 or 50.
Yeah, instead of being grateful for the wisdom and experience gained, that mindset kills initiative, imagination, self-reliance because you believe you're too old.
And trying too hard to look and act younger, inspiring ridicule.
That's the final symptom he lists for this one. It's a fear driven by societal pressures, past conditioning, and security worries. But Hill counters that potential flourishes much later if the mind stays positive and active.
Which brings us to the final, ultimate fear, the fear of death.
The cruelest one for many, Hill suggests. And he places a lot of the blame for its intensity on religious fanaticism.
He makes that controversial point about heathen societies fearing it less than civilized ones burdened by certain doctrines.
He does. He traces the fear's origin to those fundamental unanswered questions. Where did I come from? Where am I going after death? Whence and whither?
And in less informed times, cunning and crafty people offered answers for a price.
Exactly. That, he argues, is the major source of origin. He uses that tent metaphor. Leaders selling tickets to heaven, threatening hell. Eternity is a long time. Fire is a terrible thing. Thoughts that paralyze reason and instill deep fear.
He mentions reviewing that book listing 30,000 gods. Little wonder people were frightened.
Yeah, given the sheer variety of potential afterlives and judgments. The lack of definite knowledge creates a vacuum, he argues, that charlatans exploited to control minds through pious fraud and trickery.
But he sees this fear declining due to education, science.
He does. Colleges, universities, science, biology, astronomy, geology shedding light, dispelling the old superstitious fears. Though he makes that dramatic claim about insane asylums filled with people driven mad by this fear.
His ultimate take on the fear of death is pretty blunt, though. It's useless.
Completely useless. Death is inevitable. Worrying won't change it, except it is necessary. Maybe it's not as bad as pictured.
He brings in physics. Energy and matter can't be destroyed, only transformed.
Right. And if life is energy and energy can't be destroyed,
Then life can't be destroyed either. Death is just transition.
that's his logical leap. Or, he says, if it's not transition, the only other option is eternal peaceful sleep, which is also nothing to fear. So either way, adopting this view lets you wipe out forever the fear of death.
What are the symptoms he lists for this one?
The main one is the habit of thinking about dying instead of living fully. Often happens when there's no purpose, no engaging occupation. More common in the aged, but can hit the young too.
The best remedy.
A burning desire for achievement, backed by useful service. Busy people, thrilled with living, don't have time to worry about dying.
Other symptoms link back. Fear of poverty, leaving loved ones poor. Fear of ill health, worry breaking down resistance.
Yes, and the commonest causes listed are ill health, poverty, lack of purpose, disappointment in love, insanity, and religious fanaticism again.
So these 6 fears, their symptoms, they often lead to or are sustained by old man worry, right? And they make us susceptible to that 7th basic evil, negative influences.
Exactly. Worry, Hill explains, is just a state of mind based on fear. Slow, insidious, paralyzes reason, destroys self-confidence, kills initiative. At its root, worry is sustained fear caused by indecision.
And since indecision is a state of mind, worry is controllable.
That's his core belief. Worry is controllable because indecision is controllable. An unsettled mind riddled with indecision is helpless. He saw this writ large during the Depression, mass indecision, mass fear. Forenza and worryitis, he called it.
Like antidote.
Prompt and firm decision. Simple as that.
Mm.
But you have to apply it yourself. Once a firm decision is made, he claims, worry vanishes.
He uses that incredibly stark anecdote of the man about to be electrocuted.
Powerful, isn't it?
Wow.
The condemned man was the calmest person there. Why? Because he knew his fate was sealed and he had decided to accept it. That decision brought peace.
And Hill argues decision can also prevent acceptance of bad circumstances if made proactively.
Absolutely. That's the more important application.
So the way to conquer worry is to make a firm decision about each underlying fear.
That's the method. Decide to accept death. Decide to accept wealth without worry. Decide not to worry what others think, criticism. Decide to see old age as a blessing. Decide to forget minor symptoms, ill health. Decide you can cope without a specific person's love if needed.
And the ultimate decision against all worry.
Decide that nothing in life is worth the price of worry. That single decision, he says, brings poise, peace, calm, happiness.
He also warns that a mind full of fear doesn't just hurt you, it transmits bad vibes, affects others.
Yeah, destructive vibrations. He compares it to animals sensing fear in humans. Dogs, horses, even bees react. Fear vibes pass between minds like sound through air, using the same medium. Mental telepathy is real, he states.
And expressing negative thoughts, even just internally, has a kickback.
Yes. 3 ways. Damages your creative imagination, creates a negative personality that repels people. And critically, those negative thoughts embed themselves in your own subconscious, becoming part of your character. You don't just release them, they plant seeds inside you.
Given that our goal is success, peace, meeting needs, happiness, and all that starts with thought.
Then the absolute essential task is controlling your own mind. You feed it thoughts, positive or negative. You have the power and the responsibility to use it constructively. You are master of your destiny because you can control your thoughts.
Fail to control your mind. Control nothing else.
That's the bottom line. Protect your mind, your spiritual estate, with your willpower, like royalty guarding treasure.
He wishes there were laws against poisoning minds with negative suggestion. Calls it a terrible crime.
He does, which leads right into the devil's workshop, the 7th basic evil, susceptibility to negative influences.
Not a fear itself, but deeper, more subtle, more fatal sometimes. Fertile ground for failure.
Exactly. Rich people protect against it, poor people often don't. Success requires building immunity. Self-analysis is key to finding your vulnerabilities.
It strikes unaware. Weapon is intangible. A state of mind, a suggestion, can come from anywhere, even well-meaning relatives or your own attitude. Deadly as slow poison.
All of that. So how do you protect yourself?
What are Hill's steps?
Okay, first, recognize you have willpower. Use it constantly to build immunity. Second, recognize human nature. We tend to be lazy, indifferent, easily swayed by suggestions matching our weaknesses. Third, recognize your specific susceptibility to the 6 fears and build habits to counteract them.
Fourth, understand negative influences work subconsciously, so keep your mind closed to discouraging people. Fifth, practical stuff, clean out the medicine cabinet, stop indulging minor illnesses, symbolic actions.
Sixth, very important, deliberately seek out people who inspire you to think and S02 for yourself.
And crucially, do not expect troubles, because they tend to show up if you do.
Right. He says the most common weakness is leaving minds wide open to negative influences. Many don't even see it as a problem or don't fix it until it's a deeply ingrained habit.
To help with that identification, he provides those self-analysis questions. Stressing brutal honesty, facing facts, maybe getting a friend's help for objectivity.
Yes, the pursuit is truth, even if it's embarrassing. Because most people deny being ruled by fear, but are subtly handicapped by hidden ones. Courageous analysis is needed.
We won't list all 40-plus questions, but the point is they're a systematic tool, right? To uncover hidden fears, weaknesses, bad habits, negative influences. Forcing honesty.
Exactly. Think about the types of questions. Do you complain often? Find fault. Feel life is futile. Feel envious. Focus on success or failure. Is your self-confidence growing or shrinking? Do you learn from mistakes? Let others' worries drag you down. Tolerate negative people. Have a definite major purpose. Suffer from the 6 fears. Use autosuggestion positively. Value possessions over thought control. Easily influenced. Face unhappiness or avoid it. Know your weaknesses and work on them. Encourage worry in yourself or others. Choose helpful lessons. Are you a negative influence? Annoyed by others' habits? Form your own opinions. Shield your mind. Inspired by your job. Use spiritual forces. Does religion help positivity? Share worries. Who are your birds of a feather? Could friends be hindering you? Judge others. Associates superior or inferior. How to use your time? Who encourages, discourages you? Biggest worry. Handle unsolicited advice. Biggest desire. Change mind often. Finish things. Impressed by status. Influenced by opinions. Cater to status. Greatest living person.
And critically, how much time did you actually spend answering these questions honestly?
Hill recommends a full day, distraction-free, then reviewing weekly for months. He promises the self-knowledge gained is astonishing, foundational.
And this deep self-look brings us back to that ultimate fact. You have absolute control over only one thing.
Your thoughts. The most significant, inspiring fact about being human, reflecting our divine nature, the only way to control destiny. Fail here, fail everywhere.
Protect your mind, your spiritual estate, with willpower like divine royalty.
Absolutely. Which leads us to alibis. Hill calls making alibis a national pastime totally failed to success. People who fail always have airtight alibis.
Why cling to them?
Because you created them. They're your brainchild. Human nature defends its creations. It's a deep habit, providing justification, making it hard to break.
Resonates with Plato. Best victory is conquering self. Worst defeat is being conquered by self.
And that other idea, the ugliness we see in others, often reflects our own nature. Albert Hubbard wondered why people waste energy on alibis when the same energy could fix the weakness.
Hill lists 57 famous alibis, claiming his philosophy makes them all obsolete.
We don't need all 57, but the pattern is clear. Those if statements. If I had money, if I had education, if times were better, if people understood me, if I could live life over, if I didn't fear what they say, if I had a chance, if people weren't annoying, if the boss appreciated me, if I just got started, if I were free, if luck wasn't against me, if I hadn't failed.
And the biggest alibi of all, the one that reveals the core issue.
If I had the courage to see myself as I really am, I would find out what is wrong with me and correct it, then I might have a chance. Shows self-deception is the ultimate barrier.
So mind control is the direct opposite of alibis and fear. It comes from self-discipline, habit. Control your mind or it controls you. No middle ground.
And the most practical method, keep your mind busy with a definite purpose, backed by a definite plan. Success demands controlling your mind, directing it relentlessly.
He uses those great examples. Edison told he couldn't make a recorder, but he knew the mind could conceive and believe anything.
F.W. Woolworth told his 5 and 10-cent store idea would fail. But he had faith, ignored the doubters, built a fortune.
George Washington told he couldn't beat the British, but exercised his divine right to believe.
Henry Sword doubted about his first car, told it wasn't practical, wouldn't sell, but he decided, I'll build the earth, and did. Became incredibly wealthy.
Hill uses Ford to kill the I never had a chance alibi.
Yeah. Ford didn't wait for a chance. He created it with vision and persistence against all odds, the difference between Ford and his workers. Ford had a mind and controlled it. Others had minds but didn't try to control them for a dominant purpose.
It brings the whole chapter, the whole book really, back to that core truth, the power of your thoughts, the need to control and direct them.
Which leads to his closing analogy, life as a checkerboard. Time is your opponent.
Hesitate, be indecisive, neglect your move, and time wipes your pieces off the board. Time doesn't tolerate indecision.
Exactly. And he tells you, the listener, that any logical excuse you had for not getting what you want from life is now gone. Obsolete. Why?
Because now you have the master key.
And what is that master key?
It's intangible, but powerful. The privilege, the power you have to create in your own mind a burning desire for a definite form of riches.
No penalty for using the key, but the price for not using it, failure.
And the reward for using it, conquering yourself, forcing life to pay up, stupendous satisfaction.
He ends quoting Emerson, "If we are related, we shall meet," implying that by grasping these ideas, you've connected with the principles, with Hill's mindset.
So this chapter really is the gauntlet, isn't it? The test you have to pass before the rest of Think and Grow Rich can truly work for you.
Absolutely. Confronting those internal enemies, indecision, doubt, fear, negative influences that stop you from even starting the journey. It's the essential clearing and preparation work.
So wrapping up this deep dive into chapter 15, the core message seems to be that our internal world, our thoughts, our state of mind is the primary driver of our external reality.
Right. Fear, doubt, indecision aren't minor annoyances. They're powerful enemies to be actively identified and beaten.
And the way to beat them and resist negative influences is through courageous self-awareness, honest self-analysis, and diligently using the one power we truly have, controlling our thoughts.
Through self-discipline, habit, firm decisions, all fueled by a clear purpose.
Exactly. And Hill presents this not as just nice philosophy, but as the crucial, non-negotiable first step. You can have great dreams, great plans, but if fear or negativity paralyzes your mind, you can't act effectively.
Which makes that self-analysis so vital. It's the diagnostic tool to find your specific ghosts, your mental roadblocks.
And those examples of procrastination and alibis, just painful reminders of how we can waste energy justifying inaction instead of fixing the weakness and moving forward.
So true.
So, as we finish this deep dive, we leave you with this provocative thought, building directly on Hill's main point. If controlling your thoughts is genuinely the only thing you have absolute power over, what is the single most powerful intentional thought you could choose to cultivate and hold on to today right now, specifically designed to counteract one of the fears or negative influences Hill described?
Something for you to really reflect on, maybe even put into practice immediately, as you move forward on your own path toward whatever riches means for you.